So let's now work on this starting page template and also the styling for this template. Now, since this is no CSS course and also no course focused on HTML, I don't want to bore you with too much of that, and therefore I will provide certain resources for you. So for example, I will provide certain CSS files so that we don't need to write all these styles from the ground up together. I will walk through all the important steps together with you though. And therefore, let's now work on this index.html file, which represents our starting page. There, in the main content which we inject into our core template, I definitely want to have a header there. So I'll add a header which will hold some navigation later. I definitely want that because later in the header, I want to have a way of always going back to the starting page, and I want a link to the all posts page. So we'll need these two links in the header. Therefore, in this header, I'll add a h1 tag in which I'll then add an anchor tag, which should later lead back to the starting page. And here I simply want to say max blog because I'm building my blog page. Of course, use your name here instead of max. But this will be the main title of my page, of my entire site. It will be present on every site later. And when you click that title, you should be taken back to the starting page. Now that's one of the two links. The second link will be placed in a nav element since it's part of the main navigation. And there I want to have a link which in the end leads to the all posts page. So here I want to have all posts like this, and we'll plug in the concrete link values, so these URLs later. So now that's the header, which I definitely want to have. Now below the header, let's say we want to have three main sections. One section is the welcome section, where we basically greet the visitor. Then below that, we have a section with the latest posts. And below that, we have some section with more information about ourselves, let's say. Therefore, I'll delete this dummy h1 tag and add my first section here, like this. And I'll give this section an ID of welcome. And this ID will soon be used for styling, so make sure you're assigning the same ID as I do. I actually will also add an ID here to the header and name this main-navigation. And that will also be used for styling later, so make sure you also add this ID to the header and this ID to the section here. Now, in this welcome section, I want to have another header, which belongs to this section here, where I in the end have a text where I greet the user or where I present this page and where I have a little image. Therefore, I'll add an image tag with a source we'll set soon and an alt text where I say Max, the author of this blog. And below that image, I want to have a h2 tag where I say Maximilian's blog. Of course, use your name instead of my name in all those places. And we'll use the image, or we'll add the image soon, but for the moment, I'll just leave that empty. Now, below that header, but still in that welcome section, I want to have a paragraph where I then also say, hi, I am Max, and I love to blog about tech and the world. So that will also be some text that belongs into this section. Now, below that, below this welcome section, I want to have another section. And this section will be about presenting the latest posts. So here I want to have an idea of latest posts on this section here. And then in there we have a h2 tag where I say my latest thoughts, whatever you want. And then in there I want to have an unordered list with all those posts. So here we have an unordered list with a couple of list items for the individual posts. Now, I will add one dummy post here for now so that we can also see the styling in action. We're soon, of course, going to generate this list dynamically, since the concrete post data should be coming from our views in the end. I don't want to hard code the post data into these templates, because if we would build our website like this, we wouldn't need Django at all. The idea is that instead we're deriving that data dynamically in our views. Later, it will come from a database. For the moment, we'll use some dummy data in the views, but that we then generate those templates or the HTML files dynamically based on that data which we get from our views. Therefore, for the moment, I'll just add one hard-coded dummy blog post here so that we can see the styling in action. Now, speaking of that one blog post, here I want to have an article inside of my list item. And in that article, or on that article, first of all, I want to have a class of post, which will also be used for styling. So make sure you also add this class. And then here I want to have an anchor tag with a link, which we also need to add soon. And inside of that anchor tag, I then want to have an image for that post. And I also want to have an alt text. And this first post is about mountains, so I will name this mountain hiking. Now, below this image, I want to have a div, which will group some other content together. And that div will get a class of post underscore underscore content. So I got double underscores here. That's just a CSS class naming technique named BEM. For block element modifier. I'm teaching that in my CSS course if you're interested. Here, the only thing that matters is that you use the exact same class name as I'm doing so that the styles, which I'll provide to you later, will work. Inside of that div, I want to have an h3 element where I say mountain hiking. That is that title of that single blog post, so to say. And below that, a paragraph with a little preview text. And here I'll just say, there's nothing like the views you get when hiking in the mountains. And I wasn't even prepared for what happened whilst I was enjoying the view. So got a little clickbaity text here. Okay, so that's that. Now we got this first blog post added here. Again, it will not be the last one, but the other blog posts will be generated dynamically. So for the moment, that's it. And therefore now I'll move on to the last section, which I want to add. This will be the section with more information about us. So I will give it an idea of about, and then in there, we could have a h2 tag where we say what I do, and close that tag. And below that, have a paragraph with some text where we, for example, say, I love programming, I love to help others, and I enjoy exploring new technologies in general. Something like this. Of course, that text is entirely up to you. I'll also add a second paragraph here with more text where we say, my goal is to keep on growing as a developer, and if I could help you do the same, I'd be very happy. Whatever. This is just some dummy text, of course, just some dummy content in general, but that's the whole idea here. It's not about the content, but it's about building a blog which you could fill with any content you wanted to. So for the moment, of course, that's all static dummy content here, but as I mentioned, we're soon going to pull that from the views and then inject this into the template dynamically. Nonetheless, we can already see something. If we save this template and we reload localhost 8000, I get an error. Invalid block tag on line 51 end block. I think because I pressed auto formatting here, probably. Yeah, that line break, which was added here due to auto formatting, that destroyed everything. Make sure you don't have any line breaks in your tags here. This must be in one line. So here auto formatting screwed me a little bit, but if I fix this and reload, that works. Now, the images are missing and the styles are 100% ugly, but the content is there. Now, before we add the images, let me finish this lecture here by adding some CSS styles. And for this, I prepared some CSS files for you so that we don't have to write all that CSS code together. Now, I got some general styles which apply to the entire project and which I therefore want to store in some root folder. And I got some application-specific styles. Hence, I will add a new folder next to templates, which I'll name static. So that's a global static folder in the entire project. And I'll also add a static folder in the blog app, which will then hold the static files for this specific app. Now, for the specific app, I then follow this best practice of adding a blog subfolder in the static folder. And then in there, I want to add an index CSS file, which holds the CSS code for the index HTML template. So the stylings which are very specific to this starting page. And in the global static folder, I want to set up some general application-wide styles, and therefore I'll add a app CSS file in here. Now, as I mentioned, I did prepare some styles for you, so attached you find my app CSS and my index CSS files, the finished ones, and you can download them and replace yours with it, or just copy the styles you find in there into your files. And my app CSS file looks like this, for example. I'm importing some Google fonts. I'm then setting these fonts for the titles and for the general text, removing some margins, and that is basically it. And for the index CSS file here for the static block, you also find that file attached. And this file contains quite a lot of styling logic, which is why I didn't want to go through that together with you. Instead, I just give you that finished style file with lots of CSS styles. Now, I also want to mention that these styles are not optimized for mobile devices. I really just optimize them for desktop screens because, again, it is no CSS course, and I therefore focus on the Django and Python part here and just give you some basic styles that work. Of course, feel free to tweak those styles to also look great on mobile devices if you want to. Now, either way, of course, we'll need to include those styles, because at the moment we have those files, but those files on their own don't do much. Instead, we need to add imports. For example, in the base HTML file. There, I want to add a link tag, a link with rel style sheet, and here I want to import this app CSS file. Now, you learned how that works. First of all, we need to add a tag at the top where we load static. This enables static files in this template, or it enables the static tag, which helps us generate links to static files, I should say. Then we can use this static tag here where we need a URL to a static file. And there we then simply specify the static file name or path to that static file. And in this case, it's app CSS in this global static folder. Now, you also learned that by default, this global static folder isn't picked up by Django though. Therefore, we should also go to the settings py file, and we do have a static URL, which is /static/, which is fine. But here we also need to add the static files dirs, written like this, which should be a list. And in that list, we now have to list all the directories which also hold static files, besides the app-specific static folders. And for this, we can again use base dir and then combine this with static to point at this global static folder and also get Django to include that. Now with that, this URL should be generated, and therefore I now just want to make sure that I also include the index CSS file correctly. For that, I already have the CSS files block in the base template, and therefore in index.html, where I extend that template, we now just also need to load static, and then add a new block here, the block CSS files, to inject something into that placeholder in our base template. And here I then also want to add a link with a rel of style sheet and then a ref, which we have to generate with help of the now available static tag, because we're loading static. And here I want to include the index CSS file, which is in the blog subfolder in the app-specific static folder. And therefore here it's blog/index CSS. Now let's quit that development server with Ctrl-C and then restart it with python manage py run server. And let's see whether that works. If we now reload localhost 8000, this looks way better, I would say. This looks way nicer, and I'm zoomed in quite a bit here, so let me zoom out a bit. This looks way nicer, and I think it's now a good time to also add those images, which we also need.